If I had to pinpoint the exact moment I realized I didn't belong in my own family, it wasn't when my dad forgot to show up to my school play, or when my stepmom rolled her eyes every time I brought home an A- like it was some kind of joke. No, it was much quieter than that. It was in the way people stop expecting anything from you. That cold shrug of disinterest. The polite nods when you try to talk about your goals, followed by a change of subject. I'm Scott, 22 now, but this story begins a little before my graduation dinner, at the tail end of my final year in college, when I should have been celebrating the hardest earned achievement of my life. Instead, I found myself mentally preparing for the one event I dreaded more than finals week. A dinner with the people who spent the better part of my life reminding me I wasn't enough. I come from a split household, but that word, split, feels too clean, too symmetrical. My parents divorced when I was 8, and it wasn't one of those we grew apart things. It was messy, bitter, and loud. My mom was the kind who tried, in every possible way, to shield me from the worst of it, even when she was barely holding herself together. My dad, on the other hand, saw me as an obligation. He never really wanted kids. I figured that out when I was about 10, after the 5th time he forgot my birthday. He remarried when I was 11 to Rachel, the kind of woman who smiles with her mouth, but not her eyes. She had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and they instantly became the stars of every family gathering. I was the afterthought, the extra chair, the one who should just be grateful he still had a place at the table. Rachel was a master of subtle cruelty. She never outright insulted me, never raised her voice or called me names. Instead, it was always the little digs disguised as jokes. "Scott's more of a dreamer, isn't he?" she'd say during dinner, when I talked about wanting to go to college out of state. Or, "You're not really the academic type, but that's okay. The world needs all kinds." She loved to talk like she was complimenting me, but there was always a barb buried in the sugar. My dad would just chuckle along. Sometimes I think he laughed not because it was funny, but because it was easier than defending me. I didn't see them much after I left for college. Part of that was distance, physically and emotionally. I went to a university 6 hours away and only came back for major holidays. The few times I did visit, I stayed with my mom. She didn't have much. She was working 2 jobs and barely managing rent, but she made room for me like I was a piece of her heart coming home. Meanwhile, my dad's side lived in a spacious 4-bedroom house with a pool and a fireplace no one used. When I did drop by, it was like being in someone else's Airbnb. They'd nod, ask vague questions about school, then return to whatever they were doing. I was more furniture than family. Still, despite all of that, I pushed myself. Maybe it was spite, maybe just survival, but I made it. I graduated with honors, double major in English and psychology. I even landed a research assistant position before walking the stage. My mom was there in the front row, crying with pride, holding a handmade sign even though I begged her not to. My dad RSVP'd, yes, then texted me the night before that he had a work thing. Rachel liked the post on Facebook, though. That was her version of support. A week after the ceremony, my dad called out of the blue. He said they wanted to do something nice for me, to celebrate my graduation. The tone in his voice made it sound more like a chore than a congratulations. Still, a part of me, I guess the same part that still hoped for his approval, said yes. So we planned a graduation dinner at this upscale restaurant downtown. Not the kind of place I usually go, but Rachel loved anything that gave her an excuse to wear something expensive and post about it. When I showed up that night, I wasn't expecting warmth or fanfare, but I also wasn't prepared for what was waiting. The table was already full when I arrived. Rachel's kids, Jason and Ava, were there, both in their mid-20s now and doing very well for themselves, if you asked Rachel. Jason was some kind of real estate guy who constantly name-dropped the brands he wore, while Ava worked in marketing and called herself an influencer on the side, which basically meant she filmed brunches. My dad greeted me with a half hug, the kind you give your neighbor's dog, and Rachel air-kissed the air next to my cheek like she was greeting a foreign diplomat. "Look who decided to show up," Jason joked as I sat down. Rachel smiled. "You clean up well, Scott. Your hair still does that messy thing, huh?" Yeah," I muttered, trying not to grit my teeth. The waiter came around, and everyone ordered wine. Rachel made a point of saying, "Oh, Scott, do you even like wine? Or is that too sophisticated?" Another joke. Another barb. I laughed it off because that's what I'd trained myself to do. Dinner went about as well as you'd expect. Jason bragged about a condo he just bought. Ava scrolled through her phone showing everyone pictures of her content trip to Portugal. My dad nodded proudly at their accomplishments, chiming in with things like, "That's my girl," or "Jason's killing it these days." When the conversation circled to me, Rachel tilted her head and asked, "So what's next for you, Scott? Any plans beyond, reading books and writing papers?" I told them about the research assistant role, about the potential grad school opportunity, about how excited I was to work on a project studying adolescent resilience. But halfway through explaining, I noticed my dad was checking his watch. "Sounds interesting," Rachel said. "Does it pay?" "It's a stipend, yeah," I said, suddenly aware of how quiet the table had gotten. "It's not a ton, but it's great experience." Jason smirked. "So basically unpaid." "Technically. It's okay," my dad cut in. "Not everyone figures it out right away. College is the starting point, right?" I nodded slowly. "Right." Then came dessert. The waiter brought over a gift bag with tissue paper spilling out of the top. Rachel handed it to me with an exaggerated grin. "A little something to celebrate your surprising success," she said. I pulled out the tissue and found a white t-shirt inside. On the front, in bold black letters, it said, "Barely passed." I blinked. My dad let out a chuckle. "Come on, it's funny. You always cut it close, remember?" I looked around the table. Jason was snickering. Ava had her phone out like she was recording. Rachel sipped her wine, eyes twinkling with satisfaction. And that's when I felt it, that switch inside me. The one that had always kept me quiet. Always told me, be grateful. Always made excuses for their behavior. It flicked off. I stood up slowly. My hands weren't shaking. My voice wasn't cracking. For the first time in years, I felt calm. I raised my glass and looked around the table. "To the people who gave up on me before I even started," I said, locking eyes with my dad. "Don't worry. I'm done trying to prove anything." Then I set the glass down, turned, and walked out of that restaurant. But before I left, I made sure to leave something on the table. Something I'd been holding onto for months. Something they never expected. And that's when everything changed. I didn't cry when I left the restaurant. Not in the car. Not in the parking lot. Not even when I got home to my tiny apartment with its peeling paint and humming fridge and a single flickering light bulb that I hadn't gotten around to fixing. I sat there on the edge of my bed for a long time, fully dressed, still in the same button-up shirt I'd ironed for what was supposed to be a milestone night. My graduation dinner. My celebration. My chance to finally hear, "I'm proud of you," from the man who helped bring me into this world. But it wasn't until around 2 a.m., long after the adrenaline had worn off and the silence became unbearable, that it hit me. I didn't cry because I was sad. I cried because I was angry. Because I was done. The something I left on the table before walking out was a sealed manila envelope, and inside was a full-color printed copy of a screenshot. It was from Rachel's Instagram stories, posted 4 days before graduation. A boomerang clip of her, my dad, Jason, and Ava sipping champagne in what looked like their backyard, balloons in the background that read, "Congrats grad," with a little graduation cap banner hanging off the edge of the patio umbrella. The caption read, "So proud of our baby Jason finishing his real estate certification. Onward and upward." That's right. Not even an actual degree. A 6-week course he took online. No mention of me. No celebration post. No banner. No party. Not even a text. I found out about the whole thing because Ava's account wasn't private and she had posted the same clip on her story, just with a different caption. "Champagne showers for the real MVP clinking glasses at Jason kills it every time." I remember staring at it on my phone for a long time, trying to convince myself it was fake. Or maybe just a coincidence. But it wasn't. That was their celebration. For Jason. And when I graduated, all I got was a t-shirt that mocked me and a family dinner where they made me feel like an inconvenience. After I walked out that night, I went radio silent. No calls. No texts. Nothing. I let them sit in their silence, wondering what was in the envelope, and more importantly, why I'd finally snapped. And as much as I wanted to confront them, really let loose, and tell them everything I'd been holding in for years, I knew that kind of confrontation wouldn't change anything. These people didn't see me. They never had. They saw who they wanted me to be. The weird, quiet, artsy kid who probably wouldn't make it out of community college. So I let the silence do the work for me. A week passed before I heard anything. Not from my dad. Not from Rachel. But from Jason. He texted me. "Jason, yo man, not cool. You made Dad look like a jerk at dinner. No, how are you? No, congrats. Just that. I stared at the message for a few minutes before replying. Me. Didn't have to do much. He managed that all on his own. Jason, you've always been so sensitive. It was a joke. Ah yes. The sacred family excuse. It was a joke. The rallying cry of every person who thinks cruelty is just a punchline. Me. You're right. I've been sensitive. Sensitive enough to notice when your graduation party got champagne and balloons and I got a t-shirt that said, barely passed. Sensitive enough to realize Dad never even mentioned my degree to any of you. He didn't reply, but later that day my dad did. It was a short voicemail. He didn't even try calling twice. Scott, listen, I don't know what that envelope was about, but Rachel's really upset. If you had something to say, you should have just said it. No need for dramatics. Call me back. I didn't, because if I had, I probably would have said something I couldn't take back. Instead, I focused on work. The research assistantship was demanding, but it gave me purpose. I was helping build a case study about emotional resilience in young adults with strained parental relationships. Funny how life lined up like that. I dove in, spent hours combing through data, analyzing transcripts, writing observations. It became a kind of therapy for me. I read stories from people who'd gone through similar things, being ignored, mocked, excluded, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was crazy. But of course, life doesn't let things stay quiet for long. The next Real storm hit 2 months later, just as I was beginning to settle into this new chapter of peace. It started with my mom calling me, voice shaky. Scott. Honey, I didn't want to bring this up, but your father came by. That sentence alone nearly made my stomach drop. He came by, I asked. To your house. Yesterday. Said he wanted to talk. I didn't let him in, but he left a letter. I could hear her sifting through papers on the other end of the line. I haven't opened it yet. Thought maybe you should. I asked her to read it to me. She hesitated, then started. Scott, we need to talk. You're blowing things way out of proportion, and frankly, it's not fair to Rachel or the rest of the family. We've supported you more than you give us credit for. Remember who helped you get that used car in sophomore year? That was me. Remember who co-signed your lease? That was me too. Maybe it's time to stop acting like a victim and start acting like part of this family. I didn't even let her finish. Mom, I said quietly. Can you send me a photo of that letter? I need it. Of course, sweetheart. Are you okay? I will be, I said. But I wasn't. Not yet. Because that letter? That smug, passive-aggressive attempt to guilt me back into silence? That was the breaking point. Let me be clear. Yes, my dad helped me get a used car. He paid for part of it, and I paid off the rest working 2 jobs. Yes, he co-signed my lease. He also reminded me of it constantly, like I owed him my loyalty in exchange for basic decency. But he didn't show up. He never called unless someone told him to. He forgot birthdays, missed milestones, and worst of all, he let Rachel poison every attempt I ever made to be seen, heard, or loved. And now, he was using my mom as a messenger? I was done. But what happened next? I didn't see it coming. A week after that letter showed up, Rachel reached out to me directly, through email, like this was some corporate HR exchange. Subject, let's move forward. Dear Scott, I know things got a little tense at the dinner, and I understand you're feeling hurt. But you're a grown man now, and I think it's time to put the past behind us. Your father and I have always wanted what's best for you, even if it didn't always come across that way. Jason is hosting a Labor Day barbecue at our place, and we'd love to have you join. It would be a great opportunity to reconnect and show everyone you're doing okay. Warmly, Rachel. It took me 3 reads to really absorb the last line. Show everyone you're doing okay. Like I was a project, a repair job, something broken that they wanted to put on display to prove how well their duct-tape parenting had turned out. I didn't respond. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I booked a session with a therapist, not because I was spiraling, but because I needed clarity. I needed someone unbiased to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. And you know what? That one session changed everything. She listened, really listened, and then said the words I think I'd been waiting to hear since I was 12. Scott, it sounds like you've been performing for their approval your whole life. And the moment you stopped, they didn't know what to do with you. I sat there frozen. Because that was it. I had been performing. All those straight A's. All those honor societies. The double major. The scholarships. I wasn't doing it because I loved the applause. I was doing it because I thought maybe this time, someone at that table would look at me and see something worth being proud of. But they never would. Not because I wasn't enough, but because their approval wasn't real to begin with. It was conditional, transactional. And when I stopped playing the part, I became a problem. I didn't go to the barbecue. I didn't email Rachel back. But I did start planning something. Something I'd been slowly building ever since that envelope hit the table and the room went quiet. And if they thought I'd already made my statement by walking out, they had no idea what was coming next. You ever wake up one day and realize that everything you've been chasing, every ounce of validation, every gold star, every forced smile at a dinner table that doesn't feel like yours, was never really for you? That was me, a few weeks after the barbecue I didn't attend, sitting alone in a quiet campus library, flipping through transcripts for the research project I was working on. One of the interviewees had said something that struck me like a slap to the chest. My family didn't neglect me violently. They just faded me out, like I was a blurry extra in their movie. I stopped reading, because that was it. That was the perfect description of my life. I was the extra, background noise, the blurry one. And now that I had stepped out of the frame, they weren't angry that I left. They were angry that I stopped playing my role. That realization should have been freeing, and in a way, it was. But it also left a hollow ache. Because if I wasn't chasing their approval anymore, then what was I chasing? That question haunted me more than the silence that followed. My dad hadn't reached out again. Jason's texts had stopped. Rachel's email was the last I'd heard from her. I thought I'd feel stronger, powerful, like I finally had the upper hand. But all I felt was alone. I didn't have a big friend group. Never really did. I wasn't the guy people invited to weekend getaways or rooftop parties. I had maybe 2 close friends, and both lived in different states, knee-deep in their own post-college lives. My mom tried to be supportive, but I kept my distance. I didn't want to drag her into the mess or make her feel like she had to pick sides. She had enough on her plate. There were days I didn't leave the apartment. Just made instant coffee, read academic journals, and scrolled through job boards. The stipend from my assistantship barely covered rent, and groceries were starting to feel like a luxury. I cut corners, bought off-brand cereal, skipped meals, sold my old gaming console for grocery money. The funny part? I still kept pushing myself to look fine on the outside. I posted clean, casual updates on LinkedIn. I shared photos from nature walks I forced myself to take, just so people wouldn't ask if I was okay. I even wrote a heartfelt caption about new beginnings under a picture of my coffee mug, pretending like I was at peace. But I wasn't. I was exhausted, broke, numb. And then came the worst of it. One night in late September, I got an email from the university's research office. Funding for the project I was assisting on had been cut due to departmental restructuring. Effective immediately. No severance. No transition plan. Just done. I stared at the screen for over an hour, rereading the same paragraph, trying to make sense of the words. I had poured months into that work, hours upon hours of analysis, documentation, behavioral mapping. I had even started drafting a proposal for a publication. It was the one thing keeping me afloat, financially and emotionally. Now it was gone, and with it, the last shred of stability I had. That night, I broke. Not in a dramatic, movie-style way. I didn't punch walls or scream into pillows. I just lay on the floor, in the dark, staring at the ceiling with my hands on my chest like I was waiting for some invisible weight to lift. It didn't. It just pressed harder. I remember thinking, is this what they meant? When Rachel said, "We've always wanted what's best for you." When my dad said, "You're blowing things out of proportion." Did they know I was barely hanging on? Did they care? Or did they think this was just me being too sensitive again? For a while, I entertained the idea of calling them. Not for help, just to talk. Just to feel like someone out there still remembered I existed. But then I remembered the t-shirt. Barely passed. The champagne toast I never got. The party I wasn't invited to. And I knew, deep down, that nothing had changed. Nothing would change. Because they hadn't hit their breaking point. I had. And that was the only difference that mattered. But something shifted after that night. Maybe it was the rock bottom of it all, being broke, unemployed, emotionally drained. But somewhere in that darkness, I made a quiet decision. If no one was going to clap for me, I'd learn to clap for myself. If no one was going to believe in me, I'd build something so strong they couldn't ignore it. So I started small. I updated my resume. Brutally. Cut out the fluff. Added the real stuff. The hard skills, the gritty hours I'd put into fieldwork, the software I'd taught myself just to keep up. I applied for everything. Nonprofits, research labs, startups. I didn't care if the pay was low or if the office had a foosball table. I just needed a foot in the door. Rejection after rejection rolled in. Some were kind, some weren't. A few didn't even bother responding. But I kept going. Every night, I gave myself 1 hour to wallow, just one. I'd listen to sad music, write in my journal, feel sorry for myself. Then I'd shut it down and do something productive. A spreadsheet, a cover letter, a podcast episode about trauma healing. Something, anything. Then, about 3 weeks into the grind, I got a call. Not from a research lab, not from a startup, but from a former professor of mine, Dr. Camila Reyes. She had been on the committee for my senior thesis and had quietly followed my work ever since. We weren't close, but she had always shown a subtle kindness that stood out. "Scott," she said warmly, "I heard what happened with the assistantship. I'm so sorry." "Thanks," I said, not trusting myself to say more. She paused. "I don't want to overstep, but I might have something for you. It's not glamorous, but it's meaningful. We're launching a pilot program for trauma-informed education, and I remember your thesis. You'd be perfect for the team." I didn't even ask what the pay was. I just said yes. And that's when things started to change. The work was hard. It involved long hours, intense case studies, and a lot of meetings with people who were carrying decades of pain. But I felt alive. I felt useful. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was performing. I was just being. Slowly, I started putting my life back together. I found a cheap shared office space and turned it into my productivity zone. I budgeted every penny, cooked most of my meals, and sold a few freelance articles just to pad the gaps. My mom noticed the change too. We started talking more regularly, not just about survival, but about life. She'd tell me stories about her younger years, about how she almost became a journalist, but chose motherhood instead. I saw her not just as a parent, but as a person. And she saw me, really saw me. One afternoon, I told her the full story of the graduation dinner. The t-shirt, the gift bag, the champagne party for Jason. She didn't cry. She just listened, nodded, and said, "You deserved better. You always did." That was all I needed. Validation, not from someone who owed it to me, but from someone who knew me, really knew me. Weeks turned into months. The trauma-informed program gained traction. Our team got featured in a local online paper. I was asked to co-present at a regional conference. I started getting emails from other departments asking if I'd consult on emotional resilience curriculum. Then one day, I got a message from someone I hadn't thought about in a while. "Ava." Subject line, "Hey. Hey Scott, hope you're well. So I saw your name in the article about the education program. Super impressive. Just wanted to say congrats. And maybe we could grab coffee sometime and catch up? I've been thinking about family a lot lately." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to explain myself. Let them wonder. Let them see my name pop up in unexpected places and try to piece together how I went from barely passed to keynote speaker at a regional conference. Let them sit with the silence they built. Because now, I was building something of my own. And the best part? They still had no idea what else was coming. It was somewhere between the standing ovation at the regional conference and the second email I ignored from Ava that I realized something strange had happened. I wasn't trying to get even anymore. I was winning. And not in a petty, ill-show-you kind of way, but in a way that felt solid, grounded, like I had built something real, without needing their permission, applause, or approval. I was being asked to lead panels, write white papers, co-author actual policy proposals for trauma-informed teaching. Every day felt like planting a seed where they'd told me nothing could grow. But even in the thick of this newfound momentum, I couldn't forget the years they spent grinding me down to dust. The t-shirt, the envelope, the gift bag, the sighs when I spoke, the empty chairs at my milestones. Every passive-aggressive jab wrapped in a smile. I wasn't obsessed with revenge. Not the old me kind of revenge, where you dream of yelling in someone's face or storming out of a dinner in tears. I wanted something cleaner, something quieter, something with a long echo. I started to think of it not as revenge, but as a reveal. Not a burning bridge, but a mirror held up so they could finally see the fire they'd set behind me. I didn't want to scream at them anymore. I wanted them to watch what I'd become. I wanted them to feel the weight of everything they threw away. And as luck would have it, life handed me the perfect opportunity. It came wrapped in an innocuous email with the subject line, "Inviting alumni to speak. Fall Gala 2025. It was from the university. The Education and Psychology Department was hosting a fall gala, part awards ceremony, part networking event, part low-key fundraiser. They wanted a few alumni speakers from the last 5 years to talk about their journey after graduation. Apparently, someone on the faculty committee had floated my name. Your story could really inspire current students," the email read. I almost laughed out loud. Inspire? They had no idea. But I replied, of course. Gratefully. Professionally. I said I'd be honored. And then, I began to plan. This wasn't just some small department gathering. This gala was an annual tradition at the university, and this year's was being hosted at a local museum downtown. Cocktail attire. Catered. Publicized. Students, professors, alumni, donors. The works. More importantly, the school had a habit of publishing clips and photos from the event online. That's when the idea took root. What if I didn't just speak? What if I used this night to say everything I'd never had the space to say? Not with bitterness, but with clarity, precision, with truth. So I began writing my speech. Not the one they were expecting. Not the cheerful, sanitized version with 3 jokes and a humble, "I owe it all to my mentors" arc. But the real story. I kept it elegant, polished, but sharp. I talked about the psychology of exclusion, about how neglect often doesn't leave bruises, but invisible scars, about how surviving certain family dynamics isn't about screaming matches. It's about learning to live with silence so loud it drowns you. I quoted research I had personally worked on. I backed every emotional beat with academic insight. And I ended with a simple, loaded line. Sometimes, the people who gave up on you before you even started end up clapping for you at the finish line, pretending they were there the whole way. It was subtle enough to slide past the university's review panel, but direct enough that anyone who knew would know. And now I had a stage. All I needed was an audience. That's when I started laying the groundwork. First, I called my mom and asked if she'd like to come as my guest. She hesitated at first. She's never been one for the spotlight, but I told her this night was as much about her as it was about me. "You were the only one who showed up," I said. "You should be there when it matters." She cried. Then she said yes. Next, I reached out to a local friend, Lana, who worked in event photography. I asked her to come, not just to take photos, but to help document the entire evening. Tasteful shots, quiet videos, nothing invasive, just proof. Then came the key move. I forwarded the university's email invitation to my dad. I used his work address, the one I knew he still used from back when I was trying to invite him to my thesis presentation, and he said he'd check his schedule and never followed up. I didn't include a personal note, just forwarded the invite. Plain, dry, professional. The event was public. Technically, any alumni or family member could attend, even without a personal ticket. I knew Rachel wouldn't be able to resist. Sure enough, a week later, my LinkedIn pinged with a profile view from Rachel D., marketing consultant, family first, proud stepmom. Typical. I didn't hear anything directly from them, but I knew what was coming. They'd show up. They'd act surprised. They'd smile through their teeth and tell everyone how proud they were. They'd drop comments about supporting Scott from the beginning and make sure their presence was visible. And that's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want them to stay home and stew. I wanted them front and center. Because this wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about making them watch me be right. The weeks leading up to the gala were a blur of preparation. Finalizing my speech, getting the right blazer, helping coordinate the AV tech for my presentation slides, practicing my delivery with Lana, who kept giving me great notes like, "More pause here," and "Let that line breathe." But there was one more piece of the puzzle I needed. Not for the speech, for the table. The dinner tables at the gala were arranged by alumni speaker, with each of us getting a small sign displaying our name and graduation year. We were allowed to invite 1 or 2 guests. Everyone else would be seated randomly. I pulled a favor from someone in admin and requested to personally arrange my table. I had the nameplate printed as Scott A., Class of 2025. Researcher, speaker, not your family's favorite, but someone worth betting on. It was small text, almost poetic, but it would make its point. And then, for good measure, I printed place cards. One for my mom, one for myself, and one for the 2 extra chairs I had no intention of filling. Reserved for those who left early. I knew it might be a little much, but it wasn't for shock. It was a statement. A quiet one. A truth they couldn't deny. Finally, the night of the gala arrived. The museum was lit up in soft amber tones, the sound of string music floating through the lobby. Waiters carried trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. Professors mingled with donors. Former students snapped selfies in front of the university's banner. I stood near the entrance with Lana and my mom, watching the crowd flow in. Then I saw them. My dad, Rachel, and, of course, Jason and Ava. They were all dressed to the nines, like they'd walked off a magazine cover. Rachel in an off-the-shoulder emerald dress, smiling like she owned the room. Jason in some fitted designer suit, laughing a little too loudly. Ava with her phone out, filming the chandelier for her event aesthetic. My dad spotted me, raised a hand, and said, "There he is." Like we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. I nodded politely. Rachel air-kissed the air next to my cheek. "We had to come," she said. "How could we miss our graduate?" She said it loud. Too loud. People turned. I just smiled. "Thanks for coming," I said. "Dinner's soon." Seating's assigned. They found their table, a few rows behind mine. Close enough to see me. Close enough to hear every word. Perfect. As we sat down, I looked across the table at my mom, who gave me a small nod of support. I looked at the empty chairs next to her, the ones with the place cards, and I smiled. Because tonight was the reveal, and it was only just beginning. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the event coordinator stepped up to the microphone and welcomed everyone to the gala. It was all warm formalities at first, thanking the donors, recognizing faculty, listing accomplishments from the past year. The kind of opening that fills the air with polite claps and occasional yawns. I barely registered most of it. My pulse thudded in my ears, slow and steady, like a countdown. I kept my expression calm, but inside, I could feel every word I had rehearsed turning into wildfire, waiting for release. Finally, they reached the portion of the night that mattered. "Our next speaker is a recent graduate of our psychology and education departments," the announcer said. "Scott A. is currently leading a trauma-informed education initiative and was recently featured in a national spotlight for his work on emotional resilience in young adults. Please join me in welcoming Scott to the stage." Applause erupted. I stood slowly. My mom squeezed my hand as I rose, her eyes glassy but proud. Behind me, I could sense movement. Rachel fixing her posture. Jason leaning forward. Ava probably turning on her phone to record. My dad. I didn't look. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out at the sea of faces, students, professors, alumni, strangers. And just behind them, at table 14, my family sat like ghosts in rented clothing. I took a breath. Then I began. When I was a kid, I thought resilience meant being tough, stoic, quiet. I thought it meant keeping my head down when people underestimated me and proving them wrong with results instead of words. And so, for a long time, that's what I did. I paused, scanned the room. I earned top marks while being told I wasn't really the academic type. I got into university while hearing jokes about how I'd probably drop out before the second semester. I pushed through every dismissive glance, every undermining comment, every backhanded, "You're not like your siblings." There was a shift in the room. People were paying attention now. Not the kind of attention you get from statistics or credentials, but the kind you earn when truth starts to cut through the air like glass. But the thing about resilience, the real kind, is that it's not just about surviving the pressure. It's about recognizing when the pressure isn't coming from the outside, but from the people closest to you, and deciding, one day, that you're not going to keep carrying their doubt anymore. I let the silence hang. I could feel the tension crackling behind me like static. My dad's posture stiff. Rachel's smile flickering like a light with bad wiring. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces. I could hear the discomfort in the absence of their applause. And I wasn't done. I graduated with honors. I entered a field that demands empathy, patience, and depth. And still, some people only saw what they expected to see. The quiet one. The dreamer. The one who probably got lucky. I stepped away from the podium slightly, letting my voice lift just enough. And to those people, I want to say thank you. Gasps rippled through the audience, soft, confused. Thank you for underestimating me. Because if you hadn't, I might have spent my life trying to meet your definition of success, instead of building my own. I turned back to the microphone, my voice now low and deliberate. Because here's the thing about the people who doubt you. They don't actually want you to fail. Not completely. They want you to almost succeed. To almost get there. Just enough to say, see, I told you he'd struggle. But not enough to make them uncomfortable. Not enough to make them question why they never clapped for you when it counted. That line landed hard. A murmur swept across the room. At table 14, silence. I closed the speech with a final thought. One I had rewritten a dozen times, carefully worded, aimed with precision. So if you're here tonight and you feel unseen, if you've ever been the extra in someone else's story, let me tell you something. You don't need their spotlight. You are your own stage. You are your own proof. Applause erupted. This time, sustained. Real. I stepped down, heart hammering, not from nerves, but from release. I returned to my table, and my mom stood to hug me. Not a quick embrace, but the kind that says I saw everything you just said, and I've always believed it was in you. Then came the second part of the plan. The part one hadn't told anyone about, not even Lana. As dinner was served and the buzz of conversation filled the hall, I stood again and walked to the event coordinator, quietly explaining that I had a small video presentation to run before dessert, tied to my work with trauma-informed education. She nodded and gave the AV tech the cue. The lights dimmed again. A hush returned, and then the screen lit up. It started simple. A title card. Resilience. What you don't see. Then came clips. Snippets from our interviews with young adults. Their words. Their stories. Stories of being told they wouldn't make it. That they weren't the smart one. That their dreams were unrealistic. One said, they threw a party for my cousin passing his driving test, but forgot my college acceptance. Another, they said I was too emotional when I cried after getting my scholarship. So I stopped telling them anything good. The room was silent. Then came the final frame. A photo. Me, in my cap and gown, standing alone outside the graduation hall. Not the university's photo, the one my mom had taken. I had cropped everything else out. Just me. With the words. Barely passed. Gasps. Some laughed, confused. Others looked around, trying to understand. But Rachel? Rachel stiffened like someone had poured ice water down her back. Jason stopped chewing. My dad's hand, resting on the tablecloth, clenched slightly. The video faded to black. No voiceover. No follow-up. Just silence. Then applause. Not from my family. Of course not. But from the room. And that was all I needed. After the event, as people mingled and congratulated me, I noticed Rachel approaching. Her smile was brittle. Eyes darting. That was a very emotional presentation, she said, voice tight. I nodded. It was honest. She glanced toward the place cards still sitting on my table, the ones that read, reserved, for those who left early. Was that really necessary? She asked. I mean, it's not like we never supported you. I met her eyes calm. You're right. It wasn't necessary. None of this was. But it was true. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned to a faculty member who was waiting to shake my hand and let Rachel fade into the background. For once, she was the extra. Jason didn't approach me. Ava hovered by the edge of the room, clearly filming event highlights, but avoiding eye contact. And my dad? He came up at the very end, as people were starting to leave. He didn't look angry, just off balance. Scott, he said, hands in his pockets. You really went all out tonight. I nodded. Felt like the right time. He gave a slow nod. Look, I know we've had miscommunications, but I've always tried to be there in my own way. I studied him. The suit, the tie, the slightly rehearsed tone. Showing up when it's convenient isn't the same as being there, I said. He exhaled through his nose, like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I guess I didn't realize you felt that way, he muttered. I guess you never asked. That shut him up. We stood there for a moment, two people with nothing left to hide behind. He glanced at my mom, who had come up beside me, still glowing from the night. She wrapped an arm around mine, subtly staking her claim. My dad nodded once, curtly, then stepped back. And that was it. No big blow-up. No apology. Just distance. Later that night, after the gala, I posted two things online. The first was a photo of me and my mom in front of the university's banner, both of us beaming. The caption read, "Success hits different when it's built from silence, doubt, and stubborn belief in yourself. Here's to the people who clapped before anyone else knew your name." The second? A story post. A close-up of the t-shirt they gave me. Barely passed. With the words, "And yet, here I am." It got shared more times than I could count. By morning, I had over 42 missed messages. Some congratulatory, some from extended relatives, and one from Rachel. "We saw your post. Very clever. Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. Because it was. And as I closed my laptop, sipped my coffee, and stared out the window at the rising sun, I realized something. This wasn't the end of a grudge. It was the beginning of peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one. I was the one with the microphone. And I didn't drop it. I set it down. Gently, calmly, because I had nothing left to prove. I had already said everything I needed to say. And the silence that followed, that was theirs to sit with. They gave me a shirt that said "barely passed." I gave them a front row seat to everything they said I'd never become.